The next Highgate Choral Society concert consists of two works which we shall sing, the Szymanowski Stabat Mater and Mozart's C minor Mass. Szymanowski, Polish composer, born in 1882, died in 1937. I think we have rather a skewed vision of Polish music in this country because we don't know a great deal of it. We don't know anything perhaps before Chopin, and of course we know him a lot because he travelled to the West, lived in Paris. His music was published and is very, very available from the very beginning of the 19th century. And then perhaps the next composers that we really know are Penderecki and Lutosławski. And of course that's way into the 20th century and we miss out all the bits in the middle. And I think there are two reasons. One, that the music perhaps isn't so available over here, and the other is perhaps because of the language itself. So if we think of Moniuszko, who was writing operas in the 19th century, obviously the language is a barrier to us, and the songs, same problem. And then when we get to Karlovich at the end of the 19th century, is that music available? Yes, it is, because it's now being recorded on the CD. And we mustn't forget Wieniawski, who of course we all know because of his violin music, and Paderewski, pianist and one-time Prime Minister of Poland. So there is a rich history of music in Poland, and we know little bits of it. Szymanowski, we like to think of his work dividing into three periods really. The early period when he was very influenced by German music, and there's a first and second symphony written around that time. And then he was influenced by Impressionism and the French composers Debussy and Ravel. And then gradually, as Poland became a state or independent in 1918, there was a group of artists who called themselves New Poland, and Szymanowski became very interested in national music and folk music. The ballet Harnessy particularly features all those sort of folk tunes. And this Stabat Mater comes into that nationalist period. It was written in 1925 and 1926. The Empress de Polignac, who had salons in Paris, and Szymanowski was well travelled, suggested to Szymanowski that he write a Polish requiem. And he thought about it, and then an event happened. His niece died, and he was so aware of his sister's grieving that suddenly he thought, hang about, the Stabat Mater is about a mother grieving. And so that's how this piece came to be written. And it is a setting of that Latin text by Jacopone de Todi, written in the 1300s, and it's what we call a sequence. It's a three-line rhyming poem, a three-line verse all the way through. And Szymanowski sets it in six movements, and he actually makes each of those movements slightly different. He either features the soprano and mezzo soloist or the baritone, and in fact in the first movement we have the grieving mother at the foot of the cross, and the music is quite austere. And then in the second movement it becomes quite aggressive, I would say, when the baritone begins to sing. And in the centre of the piece, I mean obviously with six movements there isn't a centre, but really feeling like the centre of the piece is this wonderfully unaccompanied movement where the choir sing. The piece was written in Polish. He had it translated, and I'd always understood that it should be sung in Polish, but what I now know is that he said that if it's performed in Poland, yes, it should be sung in Polish, but if it's sung somewhere else, it can be sung in Latin, the Latin we know, and so we are singing it in that Latin version. The second half of the programme is this Mozart C minor Mass, and like the Requiem, it is incomplete. Now the Requiem is incomplete because Mozart died, so why is this Mass incomplete? Now what we do know is that he promised, he wrote to his father and said, if I can marry Constanza, if I can bring her home as a bride, I will write a big Mass setting. And of course she was a fabulous singer, and her sister, which is why it's scored for two sopranos with very little for the tenor and the baritone to do. And he started work on this Mass and wrote the Kyrie and the Gloria, and it is unusual for Mozart in being a cantata Mass. In other words, it breaks up into separate movements, arias and choruses, unlike the other Masses which are Missa Brevis and just go through the whole text of the Gloria, for example, in one movement. And so he began work on this and got as far as the beginning of the Creed, which he left in sketch form, and then very luckily for us set the words Et incarnatus est, which is a fantastic solo for the soprano, ending with a very elaborate cadenza, a written out cadenza for the soloist and three woodwind instruments. And then there is no more of the credo set. He began the Sanctus and the Benedictus, and there is no Agnus Dei. And I suppose the reason for this is that there was no chance of the whole piece ever being performed. A mass of this length just wouldn't sit in the context of a service. And we understand that it was performed, or part of it, or the bits that were existed, performed a year after its composition, so in 1783. And there the Kyrie and the Gloria, it is said, was performed, although perhaps not the whole Gloria, because as I say, it's a very long piece. And the whole work stands by itself. We don't need the completion to make a wonderful evening. And again, he's a master of orchestration and invention, and the piece is full of glorious numbers, very much influenced by Handel, the big boned numbers that move in almost a stately fashion, remind us of the big moments in the Handel oratorios, and of course there is the fugue at the end of the Gloria. Just at the beginning of the concert, we're going to play an orchestration which I've done of a Szymanowski etude, because at the very beginning of Szymanowski's career he was writing for the piano, and there are a number of mazurkas by him, and this etude was for a time one of the most popular pieces by Szymanowski, and that will open the concert as a sort of overture to give us a taste of the style of Szymanowski. That is early and therefore sounds a little bit like Scriabin or certainly late Romantic music. And when we get into the Stabat Mater, we get into this more chromatic writing, which is influenced, as I say, by the Impressionists, but also elements of polytonality, or elements of writing two chords in two different keys at the same time, because Szymanowski's sound world is incredibly dense and inventive, although the Stabat Mater itself is very calm and very peaceful, ending in a glorious C-sharp major section and ending very, very quietly on a wonderful C-sharp major chord.